It is time for tonight's Money Power Politics. Today, Paramount officially launched a hostile takeover bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, despite its deal that we learned about last week with Netflix. And buried in the fine print, the deal is backed by a private equity firm founded by none other than Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as well as a huge investment from sovereign wealth funds from Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar. Amazing. Paramount didn't lead with that. So let's level set here. In the last year, Paramount merged with Skydance, giving the Ellison family control over CBS News. Kushner, with the help from Saudi Arabia, took video game giant Electronic Arts private in the largest leverage buyout ever. And to top it all off, the Ellisons, who are major Trump supporters, agreed to play a key role in TikTok's U.S. operations. That is an enormous amount of influence over media. And if their bid with Warner Brothers Discovery is successful, it is only going to get much, much bigger. My dear friend David Gura joins me now. He's a correspondent for Bloomberg and host of the Big Take podcast, and Oliver Darcy, co-founder of Status. Olivier, let us start with you. Netflix's offer does not include CNN, but Paramount has expressed interest. What would that mean if the Ellison family acquires yet another news organization?
Well, Stephanie, this is one of the most dramatic I think, fights for a Hollywood studio we've ever seen. But like you say, at stake is a lot more than Warner Brothers Pictures, which alone would be huge if the Ellisons were to get their hands on that, given how it can shape culture and the entertainment industry. But inside WBD is CNN. It's one of the assets that they are trying to acquire. And I think that's a particular interest in this fight, because Donald Trump cares very much about CNN and the ownership of CNN, the editorial programming on CNN. And when you come and look at this deal, the regulatory issues are really a wild card here. And if someone can convince Donald Trump, let's say David Ellison convinces Donald Trump that under us, CNN is going to be a lot more favorable to you, that will give the Ellisons a possible edge in getting a deal done. And so I think that's what's interesting about this deal and this whole thing is CNN is a small business component in this deal, but it is outsized in the regulatory influence it's going to have over a deal like this.
Then that's the question, right? Paramount is arguing that their all-cash offer is going to face fewer regulatory hurdles than Netflix. Is that because it's all cash? Or is it because of the influence, or is it because of the influence that the Ellison family has over this White House, or the fact that Netflix is already so big in streaming, they're going to face hurdles? What's the real reason this thing should have an easier time going through?
I think it's a combination of those things. The number one streamer buying the number three streamer is obviously a regulatory issue. And, normally that would be looked at, and it's hard to imagine how that would go through. But it's also that the Ellisons have fostered this relationship with Donald Trump. They've kissed up to him. They've bent the knee. You've seen what they've done at CBS and CBS News, for instance. They installed the ombudsman, who is very pro-Trump. They installed Barry Weiss as editor-in-chief, who has been pushing the network, I'd say, in waters that are more favorable to Donald Trump. And so it's pretty obvious that they thought that with Donald Trump as an ally, they could push this deal through. David Ellison even said today on CNBC, it was actually quite a remarkable admission, that he's talked to Donald Trump about CNN. And it's not a secret as to what that conversation would probably look like. Donald Trump has not liked CNN for the last decade since he's been in politics. He obviously wants the network's tone to change. And so I imagine that, if David Ellison gets CNN, there's an understanding that he's going to push that network in a direction that's going to be more favorable to Donald Trump. And so when you look at the regulatory issues, certainly Netflix has issues, given that it is the dominant streamer, and that would be looked at regardless. But also, I think the Ellisons were banking on the fact that they thought that they could get this deal through because of their relationship with Donald Trump.
But it is not all about the Ellisons, David, and that's what's important here. Yes, they're putting up $12 billion in financing, but you really had to dig to find out that Jared Kushner was involved in this bid. His name is not even mentioned until page 44 of a 58-page SEC filing, and $24 billion in financing is coming from Middle East sovereign wealth funds. That was definitely not in the Paramount header or headline, hey, this is Saudi backed.
Not at the top of the release, no. So it's buried in there, and I think you look at the deal and the way that that's proposed or the way that it's structured, and they've done it in a way that there wouldn't have to be a CFIUS review. The way these Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds have said they'll participate in this is they don't want any director seats on the board of this company. They're trying to navigate this in a kind of creative way. Just picking up on what Oliver said just a moment ago, we talk about this in a regulatory sense, talk about regulatory hurdles. As you level set, we should level set about the fact that none of this is normal, and there is so much acquiescence and bowing to Donald Trump. He is the chief regulator here. So Bloomberg reporting today that at the Kennedy Center Honors last night, there in David Ellison's box was Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC. He spent some time talking to President Trump at that event as well. Bloomberg also reported that Ted Sarandos had gone to the White House to meet with President Trump as well. So we're seeing this kind of one-on-one, individualized diplomacy, again, with the chief regulator, that being Donald Trump. So it's being highly personalized. And the addition of Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, with whom the president says he has this kind of professional remove. Jared's doing his thing, except when he's doing something for him, when he's going to Russia or he's going to the Middle East. It's entirely confusing. The lines are really blurred here. And I think that's why they buried it on page 44.
Well, the president has said that he has not spoken directly to Jared Kushner about the merger's approval process. Watch this.
Should they be allowed to buy Warner Brothers? Should Netflix?
Well, that's the question. They have a very big market share. And when they have Warner Brothers, that share goes up a lot. So I don't know. That's going to be for some economists to tell. And also, and I'll be involved in that decision, too. It is a big market share. There's no question about it. It could be a problem.
Okay. David, this is not something presidents are usually involved with, but Gary Kasparov wrote earlier today. He's obviously an anti-Putin activist, but he wrote, if you recall my Putinization checklist, getting media companies into the hands of leaders' friends and family is quite high. How alarming is this?
It's alarming to a lot of people. I mean, Gary Kasparov talks a lot about that playbook, and this is an example of what happened in Russia. It's happened in other authoritarian countries as well. I think people have reason to worry about how this is all playing out. In light of what Oliver said just a few moments ago, we've seen sort of telegraphed by David Ellison his vision for what Paramount is going to be. I think we spent the bulk of the weekend thinking about the complementarity of Netflix and Warner Brothers. Now we're doing the same thing with Warner Brothers and Paramount. And I think that it's not difficult to go down a path where you see them wielding a lot of control over what is effectively one of the big major news organizations in this country. All the while they have one. I mean, they have CBS already. So it's not only assuming control, but assuming control of multiple entities.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar would now have a lot of influence, Oliver, over U.S. media. What would that mean? How vulnerable does that leave us? Why would they want it?
Well, I think they want to draw tourism to Saudi Arabia. And if you can have, the Warner Brothers Discovery assets shining light on your, on tourism there, I think that would be a positive. I think they would love, for instance, White Lotus to be shot in Saudi Arabia. That might get some people heading over to Saudi Arabia and thinking maybe we should go on vacation there, right? I'm sure they would love CNN to maybe be more fair in their coverage of Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar. And so there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of soft power at play here. They might not get those board seats so they can avoid that CFIUS review, but I think they're not handing over billions of dollars for nothing. They want that soft influence, and their main goal right now is attracting U.S. dollars in the Middle East. There's no better way to do that than by having someone like Tom Cruise shooting the next Mission Impossible in your major city and showing everyone that, look, this is actually a good place. You should be investing your money here.
Meanwhile, the president wants CBS to issue him a formal apology because he didn't like an interview that was conducted with Marjorie Taylor Greene on 60 Minutes last night. That is happening in 2025 in the United States of America. Please pay attention.